The mountains of Wyoming are breathtaking. Towering walls of granite rise above endless valleys, their sheer size making you feel small, almost insignificant. But within this beauty lies danger. Danger that can erase even the most experienced climbers without a trace. In late August of 2013, Garrett Beckwith, a meticulous engineer and seasoned mountaineer, set out with his 19-year-old son Daniel to climb the legendary Mount Hooker. They carried enough gear to handle almost any emergency. Almost. Because sitting in the glove compartment of their dusty green pickup truck were two fully charged satellite phones, their lifeline to the outside world. They never took them. When Garrett and Daniel missed their scheduled check-in, what began as a concerned phone call soon spiraled into one of Wyoming's most baffling wilderness mysteries. Search teams scoured the cliffs. Climbers traced obscure routes. For years, nothing was found. Until, 11 years later, two strangers scaling a remote wall stumbled upon a haunting cliffside camp, and inside, a sleeping bag that revealed a truth no one was prepared for. So what really happened on Mount Hooker? If you find stories like this as gripping as we do, take a second to hit the like button. It really helps the channel reach more curious minds. Subscribe for more deep dive documentaries. The August sun dipped low over Wyoming, painting the Wind River Range in gold and crimson. Garrett Beckwith loaded the final pack into his truck, his son Daniel double-checking ropes, carabiners, and carefully folded climbing gear. For Garrett, preparation was ritual. Every knot tied, every piece of equipment logged, every possible contingency accounted for. Years of engineering discipline had bled into his climbing habits, and Daniel had grown up absorbing those same values. Their destination was Mount Hooker, a jagged wall of granite so imposing that even seasoned climbers spoke of it in hushed tones. To Garrett and Daniel, though, it represented challenge, pride, and a test of resilience. They carried food, ropes, cold weather gear, and layers of backup equipment. But one oversight, so small yet so crucial, remained in the truck. Two satellite phones, both fully charged, sat untouched in the glove compartment. The family back home in Lander expected regular updates. A text, a short call, some sign of progress. Garrett had promised his husband Marcus that they'd check in promptly at 7 each evening. On the first night, the silence seemed harmless. Marcus sat by the phone, sipping cooling coffee, convincing himself they were delayed on a difficult pitch, or the phone battery had drained faster than expected. But as the minutes became hours, unease crept into the Beckwith home. The ticking clock grew louder, the refrigerator's hum sharper, every sound amplified by the absence of a voice on the other end. By the second day, that absence turned menacing. Marcus paced the floor, rereading Daniel's last cheerful message from the trailhead. "Starting the approach. See you in a few days. Love you." Words now echoing with dreadful finality. Garrett's longtime partner in climbing, Alistair Finch, often described him as meticulous, almost obsessive about safety. A man who checked knots thrice, calculated weather shifts, and mapped backup routes. Missing a check-in was not in his character. On Wednesday, Marcus could no longer dismiss the dread. He dialed the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, his voice taut as he explained the situation. Garrett and Daniel, both skilled, both cautious, had gone missing on Mount Hooker. Deputy Miles Corbin was dispatched to the trailhead. Dust kicked up behind his cruiser as he drove into the wilderness, the mountains rising like jagged teeth on the horizon, their scale dwarfing everything in their shadow. When Corbin arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. Among the few vehicles sat a green Ford F-150, dust-coated, leaves beginning to gather along its windshield groove. The license plate confirmed it. Beckwith's truck. Peering inside, Corbin expected scraps of food wrappers, maps, maybe climbing guides. Instead, he found two sleek satellite phones tucked neatly in the glove compartment, fully charged, glowing to life with a press of a button. The discovery rattled him. These were no forgotten dead battery relics. They were functional, their screens bright. Garrett had left behind the single tool that could have guaranteed survival. It was a chilling contradiction. Corbin radioed dispatch, reporting the vehicle and the phones. His voice remained calm, but unease sat heavy in his gut. The narrative no longer felt like a simple climbing delay. It was something more troubling. Within hours, the trailhead swelled with activity. Search and rescue trucks rolled in, volunteers unloaded gear, and maps were spread across hoods. Mount Hooker's vastness was reduced to grids and marked routes, every contour line a possibility. The first helicopter rose that afternoon, its rotors thudding against the silence of the range. From above, the mountains stretched endlessly, cliffs, shadows, and snowfields. Spotters scanned for color, movement, anything human amid the unforgiving granite. But the sky grew darker by the second day. Storms gathered, rain turning to sleet, sleet to snow. The mountain flexed its power, grounding helicopters and forcing searchers back. Garrett and Daniel remained swallowed by silence. The official search was only beginning, but already unease curdled into something heavier. The Beckwiths were not reckless tourists. They were prepared, precise, cautious. So why were they missing with their lifelines left behind in a truck? The silence, once a quiet inconvenience, had now become a roar. A father and son were gone in the wilderness. The first chapter of Wyoming's most haunting mystery had just been written in snow and stone. The discovery of the truck, and more importantly the satellite phones, changed everything. Search and rescue veterans instantly recognized the weight of that oversight. Without communication, survival in the Wind River Range became exponentially more difficult. Back in Lander, Marcus struggled with the revelation. Knowing Garrett would never intentionally leave behind vital equipment, the detail gnawed at him. It suggested disorientation, distraction, or a rush so uncharacteristic it felt impossible. Deputy Corbin's report reached the sheriff's office quickly, triggering a full-scale response. Within hours, command tents rose at the trailhead. Radios buzzed, search grids were drawn, and climbers prepared for one of the toughest searches imaginable. Helicopters made sweeping arcs across granite walls and snowfields, their spotters scanning relentlessly. From above, the scale of Mount Hooker dwarfed everything. Sheer vertical faces stretched thousands of feet, broken only by narrow ledges and icy gullies. Ground teams pressed into the wilderness, calling names that dissolved into wind. Every canyon swallowed sound. Tracks vanished on rock. Each empty ledge deepened the unease. Garrett and Daniel seemed to have disappeared into nothing. Alistair Finch arrived at the command post, his wiry frame bent over maps. He knew Garrett better than most. "He wouldn't just vanish," he muttered. "If he isn't here, something serious happened." The official teams targeted likely routes, marked climbs, common paths, known bivouac spots. Alistair's group of elite locals searched the improbable, hidden faces, obscure walls, places Garrett might have chosen if seeking a unique challenge. Both teams returned empty-handed. Weather turned quickly. Blue skies faded to a bruised gray. Rain hardened into sleet, then snow. Helicopters grounded. Ground teams pulled back. The mountain became an ice fortress, punishing anyone who dared linger on its slopes. Search commanders faced brutal reality. Conditions were deteriorating, and with no new leads, continuing meant risking more lives. 10 exhausting days in, the official operation scaled back. Hope, once bright, dimmed under thick Wyoming snow clouds. For Marcus, days became torture. Updates shifted from optimistic to cautious to grim. Each phone call ended the same way. Nothing found. No rope, no jacket, no trace. Just silence echoing back. The community rallied around him. But casseroles and kind words couldn't pierce the hollow ache. He replayed every decision. every conversation with Garrett, searching for meaning in the missed check-in and the unused satellite phones. The truck remained a haunting anchor, perfectly ordinary on the outside, but holding inside two glowing devices, lifelines left untouched. Investigators circled this fact endlessly. Why would Garrett, a man obsessed with safety, abandon them? Rumors sprouted in town. Some whispered accident, others hinted at foul play. But most were simply baffled. Experienced climbers didn't just disappear without leaving a shred of evidence. The Beckwiths had become Wyoming's ghost story. By the end of autumn, the official case file grew thick with notes, maps, and flight logs. It contained procedures, interviews, grid searches, but no answers. The wilderness had given nothing back, only swallowed more. Winter blanketed the range, sealing off cliffs and valleys. The search was officially suspended, listed as inactive until spring. Marcus, devastated, clung to fading hope, staring at Daniel's untouched room like it was a shrine. The story of Garrett and Daniel began circulating beyond Wyoming. Outdoor magazines picked it up, calling it one of the strangest disappearances in modern climbing history. Online forums buzzed, theorizing routes, mistakes, and improbable scenarios. But among professionals, the unanswered question remained the same. The satellite phones, left behind, fully charged, capable of piercing wilderness silence. That single overlooked choice had turned a difficult search into an unsolvable riddle. With the first snows burying Mount Hooker, the Beckwiths' mystery froze too. For the world beyond Lander, interest faded with time. For Marcus, though, every day without answers was another wound left open, refusing to heal. The Wind River Range is beautiful from afar, but up close it shows no mercy. Steep granite walls, sudden storms, and thin air combine to create an environment that chews up even seasoned climbers. As search teams pressed deeper, the mountain revealed its brutal nature. Weather shifted unpredictably, rain becoming hail, sunshine collapsing into thunder. Each hour in the field meant battling cold, fatigue, and the sheer vastness of stone. Helicopters traced sweeping arcs above jagged peaks, rotors thudding through valleys. Spotters scanned desperately for bright fabric, a glint of metal, or any sign of life clinging to Mount Hooker's massive vertical face. Nothing appeared. On the ground, rescuers shouted into canyons, voices carried away by relentless wind. Trails vanished into scree slopes, and any faint prints disappeared overnight under fresh layers of snow. Every lead dissolved before it became tangible. By the third day, frustration boiled among volunteers. Maps filled with grids and crossed-out zones. Teams had hiked miles, rappelled cliffs, checked ledges. Yet the Beckwiths seemed erased, as though swallowed whole by stone. Storms rolled in earlier than expected, freezing sleet-coated granite, making footholds lethal. Search leaders reluctantly called back climbers, unwilling to risk fatalities. The mountain demanded respect, and even professionals knew it was impossible to fight. The official command post bristled with tension. Radios buzzed with clipped updates, weather forecasts, and strained voices. The focus shifted from hopeful recovery to grim endurance, waiting for a chance the storm would briefly break. Alistair Finch refused to give up. He rallied a small group of experienced locals, men who knew the mountain's less obvious routes. Unlike the official search, they targeted obscure faces Garrett might have admired. These climbers scoured hidden gullies, forgotten walls, and steep chimneys. They read Garrett's old journals, following his notes on dream climbs. Each ascent brought risk, cold, and exhaustion. Each descent returned with only silence. Marcus clung to updates from both groups. Every night he waited by the phone, praying for a breakthrough. Instead, he heard weather delays, failed sightings, and the steady erosion of hope against hard stone. The Wind River Range seemed alive in its indifference. It offered breathtaking views to casual hikers, but demanded absolute commitment from climbers. One mistake, one storm, and the mountain reminded everyone of its true nature. By day 10, optimism evaporated. Rescuers privately admitted the odds had turned slim. Publicly, they promised perseverance. Officially, the effort remained search and rescue. Quietly, many whispered that recovery was the more realistic word. The command post thinned. Volunteers departed, agencies redirected resources, winter creeping closer. For Marcus, each departure felt like abandonment. But for the teams, reality was unavoidable. Mount Hooker wasn't giving up its secrets. On the final day, Alistair lingered at the trailhead, gear packed but spirit heavy. "We looked where he'd go," he said softly. "If we couldn't find him, maybe nobody ever will." The official suspension of the search hit Marcus like a hammer. Files were stamped inactive, tents came down, and engines roared away. The trailhead emptied, leaving behind Garrett's truck, silent among falling aspen leaves. The phones inside that glove compartment haunted everyone, fully charged, perfectly capable, yet untouched. That small oversight now towered as the detail that defined the case, the inexplicable pivot point of an unsolved tragedy. With winter locking down the range, the story moved from present urgency to cold memory. For the Beckwith family, though, the mountain's silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud, endless, and utterly unforgiving. The wilderness had reclaimed its power. Mount Hooker, indifferent as ever, stood tall against the sky. And somewhere in its granite fortress, Garrett and Daniel remained hidden, the mountain's unwilling captives in an unfinished story. As the seasons turned, Mount Hooker remained silent. Snow buried the ledges where searchers once scrambled, and the Beckwith case slipped from urgency into the background hum of Wyoming's unsolved wilderness mysteries. 3 years later, a faint spark reignited attention. A backpacker fishing off-trail discovered a small glint of metal in a creek. It was a climbing nut, weathered, lodged firmly in the stone. He recognized its significance immediately. The Beckwith case was local legend, whispered in climbing shops. Carefully, he carried the find to authorities. It was logged, tested, and quickly matched the brand Garrett often preferred. For a moment, hope surged again. News stations replayed the story, showing the recovered nut against the backdrop of flowing water. The possibility that Garrett and Daniel had left evidence electrified the community, but detectives soon dampened expectations. The nut lacked markings to confirm ownership. Many climbers used the same gear, and water could have carried it miles downstream. It was a clue without certainty, fragile and inconclusive. The public's interest flared, then faded again. For Marcus, the moment was devastating. To imagine the nut as Daniel's, then to have the theory collapse, was like losing his son a second time. Years passed, but the case refused to rest quietly. In 2018, activity returned not in the mountains, but online. A long-forgotten climbing forum thread lit up with speculation about Garrett's disappearance. One anonymous user suggested something darker. They claimed Garrett had financial troubles and perhaps staged the disappearance, abandoning his life and even harming his son. It was baseless, cruel speculation, but it spread quickly. A local blogger picked up the theory, spinning the narrative into sensational headlines. Garrett, once respected, became the subject of whispers and suspicion. Marcus, already grieving, now faced the stain of rumor. The sheriff's office had no choice but to reopen the file. Investigators dug through Garrett's bank records, insurance policies, and loan documents. What they found was mundane. Bills paid, accounts stable, nothing indicating desperation. The rumor unraveled. Detectives filed a blunt conclusion, no evidence of voluntary disappearance. Garrett had not staged anything. He was a victim of circumstance, not a fugitive from life. But the damage lingered regardless. For Marcus, the speculation was a cruelty beyond measure. To lose a husband and son was torment enough. To hear whispers questioning Garrett's integrity turned grief into a wound that refused to close. The case slid back into cold storage once more, becoming a file of negations. Not foul play, not financial ruin, not a staged escape. What remained was absence, unsolved, unexplained, unfinished. Mount Hooker's silence weighed heavily on climbers who returned to its walls. The Beckwith story became a warning passed quietly at trailheads, a reminder that even meticulous preparation can crumble before nature's indifference. Every so often, tips arrived. A supposed sighting, a faded scrap of gear, a rumor of bones deep in the backcountry. Investigators followed each, returning empty-handed, their hopes punctured by familiar disappointment. In Marcus's home, Daniel's room remained untouched. Posters still on the walls, books stacked by the bed. Garrett's tools lined the garage, frozen in time. Preserving them felt like keeping a fragile thread intact. 10 years after the disappearance, silence had become the norm. Neighbors stopped asking questions. Friends no longer called with leads. Only Marcus kept waiting, suspended between hope and certainty, unwilling to surrender to finality. Yet even as the world forgot, the mountain waited. Hidden high among Hooker's granite ledges, the truth remained intact, silent, cold, and patient. The Beckwith mystery was not finished. Its next chapter was waiting to be uncovered. 11 years had passed since Garrett and Daniel vanished, their absence hardening into myth. Mount Hooker still towered, indifferent, its granite walls guarding secrets that no searcher, hiker, or rumor had been able to unlock. In the late summer of 2024, 2 climbers arrived, Ben Carter and Chloe Vance's male counterpart, renamed here as Cole Vance. Younger, ambitious, they represented a new generation armed with ultralight gear and data-driven forecasts. Unlike many, they weren't chasing fame on established routes. They sought unclimbed rock, vertical canvases untouched by chalk or steel. For them, Mount Hooker wasn't legend, it was opportunity, the chance to carve a new line. They moved with precision, scaling an unforgiving wall where holds crumbled and cracks seemed designed to repel intrusion. By their 3rd day, exhaustion pressed in, and they searched desperately for a place to rest overnight. That's when Ben spotted it. A flash of metal glinting against the stone. At first, he thought it was sunlight catching lichen. Then he realized it was a bolt hanger, old and rusted. His voice carried upward, alerting Cole. Confusion rippled between them. This wall was supposed to be untouched, yet more bolts appeared, forming a traverse toward a shadowed alcove. It looked less like ascent, more like escape. Curiosity won over fatigue. The climbers followed the anchors, moving delicately across exposed rock. Rusted hangers and sun-bleached nylon whispered of age, their presence raising a new, uneasy question. Who had been here before them? The traverse ended at an alcove. There, suspended against the wall, hung a portaledge. Its gray fabric flapped weakly in the wind, weathered, cracked, and stained by years of sun, ice, and storms. It looked abandoned, almost ghostly. A relic frozen in time. Coiled rope lay in a neat circle, bleached pale. A faded dry bag sagged against the stone. And then, the red sleeping bag. Dust clung to its fabric, weeds sprouting from its folds. Unlike abandoned gear, the scene felt intentional, preserved. The bag was zipped nearly shut, as if sealing something inside. A hush fell over the ledge. Ben and Cole exchanged tense glances. Climbers sometimes left equipment, but not like this. Not so orderly, not so deliberate. The portaledge wasn't just a campsite. It radiated the heavy, unsettling air of a memorial. Cole lowered himself cautiously onto the frame. The metal groaned, but held. His hands brushed the brittle, dry bag. Light, empty. Then his gaze fell back to the sleeping bag, its shape hinting at something beneath. Heart racing, he worked the zipper. Corroded teeth resisted, screeching unnaturally loud in the stillness. Inch by inch, it opened. At first, he saw clothing, bundled fleece, then something pale, curved, unmistakable. Bone. The skull shifted, hollow sockets staring skyward. Cole recoiled, breath caught. Ben leaned forward, his face blanching at the sight. The realization hit like cold stone. The portal edge was not a camp. It was a tomb. Inside lay a skeleton, fragile, bleached by a decade of wind. Carefully coiled rope beside it, neatly packed supplies nearby. Someone had taken time to secure this place, to preserve the body from the abyss. Neither climber spoke for long minutes. Awe and dread mingled in the thin air. The mountain, which had felt like playground and challenge, suddenly loomed as predator, reminding them of its merciless indifference to human effort. Cole's hands shook as he pulled out his phone, documenting everything. Photos of gear, the bag, the ledge. Ben noted coordinates. They dared not disturb anything further. They had stumbled onto a crime scene in the sky. That night, they descended in silence, every rappel heavy with the memory of the skull's empty eyes. Their climb, once about adventure, had become an escort of tragedy, carrying the mountain's hidden truth back into the world. The next day, with service restored, Cole's voice broke as he told dispatch, "We found something, a body, on Mount Hooker." And with that, 11 years of silence cracked open at last. News of the discovery spread quickly. Investigators reopened the long, cold Beckwith file. Detectives, forensic experts, and elite rescue climbers prepared for one of the most difficult recovery missions imaginable, processing a vertical crime scene suspended thousands of feet above ground. Helicopters circled the granite fortress, cameras zooming on the faded portal edge. From above, investigators saw exactly what Ben and Cole described, a ghostly platform frozen in time, anchored against the mountain's relentless winds for over a decade. Elite climbers descended first, establishing new anchors and safety lines. Their body cameras streamed live to detectives below, each detail documented. The bleached rope coils, brittle dry bag, and that chilling red sleeping bag secured to the frame. Carefully, they lifted the bag into a rigid container. Inside, skeletal remains told their silent story. Dental records confirmed the identity. 19-year-old Daniel Beckwith, the first definitive answer after 11 years of agonizing uncertainty. But the skeleton revealed more. A spiral fracture twisted through the tibia, catastrophic and immobilizing. Experts explained the injury was fatal in the wilderness. Daniel couldn't descend, couldn't move. His fate had been sealed by broken bone. The evidence reconstructed a harrowing picture. Garrett had stabilized his son as best he could, placing him in the sleeping bag, anchoring it to the portal edge. Every detail suggested deliberate care, a desperate attempt at protection. Supplies in the dry bag supported the theory. Water filter, medical kit, food wrappers. Garrett had left Daniel with provisions. His own harness missing from the scene implied he'd departed, alone, chasing a nearly impossible rescue. Detectives realized the portal edge was less campsite, more triage. A father, cornered by the mountain, left his injured son secured against storms before embarking on a one-man descent, gambling everything on reaching help alive. The notion hit investigators hard. Garrett hadn't abandoned Daniel. He had fought for him. His choice wasn't neglect, but sacrifice. Yet the outcome remained unresolved. Garrett's fate was still locked somewhere in Hooker's granite maze. At the command center, climbers mapped potential routes. Garrett would have sought speed, not safety, knowing time worked against Daniel. He likely chose the most direct gully, a route dangerous even without the weight of desperation. Forensic teams traced evidence. Below the portal edge, they discovered a single piton hammered into a hairline crack, weathered but unmistakably old. It marked Garrett's passage, proof he had descended alive from the ledge. But that clue ended abruptly. No further anchors, no dropped gear, no torn clothing. The trail vanished after that solitary piton, swallowed by a decade of storms and the mountain's merciless indifference. The discovery crushed hope of quick resolution. Garrett had indeed made his attempt, but whether he fell, wandered astray, or succumbed to weather remained uncertain. The mountain guarded his final movements like secrets locked in stone. For Marcus, the revelation was bittersweet. He now knew how Daniel's final hours unfolded. His son had not been abandoned but cared for. Still, his husband's fate remained untold, leaving grief suspended between closure and mystery. Investigators framed their theory plainly. Garrett had risked everything in a father's last gamble. To save his son, he set out alone against time, weather, and overwhelming odds. Somewhere in that wilderness, his story ended. The portalage recovery closed one chapter, but left another open. The father's sacrifice explained Daniel's fate, but it deepened the unresolved void around Garrett. The mountain had returned one Beckwith, but still held the other captive. The narrative resonated far beyond Wyoming. Articles painted Garrett as tragic hero, his effort both noble and doomed. Yet the chilling detail lingered. Those untouched satellite phones, lifelines deliberately or accidentally left behind, haunting every theory. Mount Hooker had revealed half its secret, a son's final resting place, tenderly secured, a father's desperate choice carved into silence. But the mountain had not yet surrendered the full truth. Garrett's last steps still remained hidden. With Daniel's remains recovered, focus shifted entirely to Garrett. Detectives, climbers, and forensic specialists mapped the gully beneath the portalage, convinced his final path had to lie somewhere along those sheer descents. Searchers rappelled cautiously, eyes scanning for fragments, gear, fabric, bones. Hours passed without reward. Then, finally, a discovery. A single weathered piton hammered deep into stone. Proof Garrett had descended that treacherous line alone. Hope surged briefly. If one anchor remained, perhaps more lay further below. Teams combed gullies and scree fields, every shadow examined, every crevice searched. But after days of effort, no additional sign of him appeared. The piton stood isolated, a fragment of evidence adrift in wilderness. Investigators admitted defeat once again. Without further markers, Garrett's trail had gone cold, erased by years of storms sweeping Hooker's unforgiving cliffs. Months passed, the case dormant once again. Then, by sheer accident, a breakthrough emerged. A biologist surveying bighorn sheep by drone captured footage of fabric snagged in a desolate basin east of Mount Hooker. The images unsettled him, faded blue scraps tangled in brush, pale shapes scattered across rock. Bones. He transmitted GPS coordinates immediately. Authorities scrambled, dispatching helicopters to insert recovery teams into the remote, trackless terrain. The basin was harsh, walled by cliffs and barren stone. Searchers descended by long line, boots crunching against scree. What they found confirmed their fears. Human remains, weathered, fragmented, scattered by 11 years of wind and wildlife. Among the tattered fabric, evidence gleamed. A titanium surgical plate, bent but intact. Records confirmed Garrett once broke his jaw in a cycling crash, requiring reconstructive hardware. The plate's design matched perfectly. The remains were his. At last, Garrett Beckwith had been found. The father's long search, begun with desperate resolve on that ledge, ended in a remote basin where no climber intended to go. His gamble ended in tragedy. Investigators pieced together his likely path. Injured, disoriented, or lost in storm, Garrett strayed from logical descents. Driven by urgency, he pressed on until he wandered into that unforgiving basin, a natural trap with no escape. The setting explained everything: his disappearance, the absence of gear, the years of fruitless searching. Garrett hadn't vanished by design. He'd fallen victim to wilderness chaos, caught between desperation, exhaustion, and terrain designed to confound. Forensic reports concluded he likely succumbed to exposure or a fall. There was no sign of foul play, only misfortune compounded by circumstance. Garrett's death, like Daniel's, was written by the merciless script of mountains. Marcus received the news with shattering finality. After years of uncertainty, the agonizing limbo ended. His husband had not abandoned their son. He had fought for him, gambling his own life in the attempt. The mountain's story now seemed complete. A broken leg on the wall, a portal edge transformed into a desperate infirmary, a father's descent toward salvation, ending in a barren basin where hope evaporated into silence. But questions lingered, gnawing at investigators. Why were the satellite phones left behind? Oversight, overconfidence, or deliberate choice? That unanswered detail remained a haunting shadow, the unsolvable pivot point of the entire case. In Wyoming, the discovery reignited public interest. Newspapers framed Garrett as tragic hero, others as cautionary tale. But climbers understood best. His story reflected their greatest fear, how small decisions can ripple into irreversible fate. The wilderness had spoken at last. Garrett and Daniel's final moments, once buried in snow and rumor, were illuminated. Yet the story carried no triumph. It ended only in loss, silence, and granite indifference. The recovery of Garrett's remains gave investigators their conclusion, but it was not closure in the traditional sense. Answers came, yet questions still lingered, circling endlessly around choices and consequences no one could undo. For Marcus, the revelation brought relief mixed with unbearable sorrow. He could finally lay both husband and son to rest, side by side. The years of waiting in limbo had ended with brutal certainty. The service was small, private, quiet. Friends and climbers gathered, sharing stories of Garrett's meticulous habits, Daniel's boundless energy, and the adventure that had drawn them into the mountains. Tears fell, but so did reverence. Climbers saw Garrett's actions as selfless. Faced with impossible odds, he anchored Daniel safely, then risked everything on a desperate descent. Though he failed to return, his intent was clear. He had fought for his son. Yet that one haunting question remained. The satellite phones. They had been ready, charged, and waiting. Why were they left behind? Oversight or confidence so strong that safety nets felt unnecessary? No answer ever surfaced. For investigators, the phones symbolized the mystery's heart. One small decision, made in quiet moments at the trailhead, had shifted fate irreversibly. With them, survival was possible. Without them, tragedy became inevitable. The story became more than a local mystery. It spread through climbing journals, documentaries, and podcasts, each retelling highlighting the dangers of overconfidence and the fragile line between preparation and oversight in the wilderness. Among climbers, the Beckwith tragedy became a parable. Newcomers heard it whispered at gear shops and trailheads. Even the most experienced, most prepared, can vanish if arrogance, error, or chance align against them. Mount Hooker remained as imposing as ever. Its cliffs still drew ambitious climbers. But each rope clipped into its rock carried the echo of Garrett and Daniel, a reminder of how easily stone can consume life. The Wind River Range, majestic yet merciless, gave no apology. Its storms, shadows, and silence remained unchanged. Nature does not negotiate. It does not compromise. It accepts only total respect, punishing lapses without hesitation. For Marcus, the house in Lander became quieter. Daniel's room stayed preserved, Garrett's workshop untouched. Though he buried them, their presence lingered, woven into every corner of a life now filled with memory. He spoke rarely about their loss, but when he did, he emphasized not despair, but devotion. Garrett had not walked away. He had fought, he had cared, and his final act was love. Over time, the case settled into Wyoming folklore, ghost stories told around campfires, cautionary tales for climbers, not about malice or crime, but about how thin the line between triumph and tragedy can be. The Beckwith mystery officially closed with the files stamped complete, but for those who had searched, climbed, or prayed, the story would never feel finished. Mountains rarely provide neat endings. They only leave echoes. Garrett and Daniel's legacy lay not in their disappearance, but in their bond. Father and son, climbing partners, taken together by the wilderness they loved. Their story reminded others of both beauty and danger intertwined. Years later, hikers still pass the big sandy trailhead, sometimes pausing by memory. The green ford no longer sits there, but the silence of that place still seems to hold their names. Mount Hooker still towers, its walls scarred by storms but unchanged in defiance. Somewhere within its cold stone, the story of Garrett and Daniel lingers, a permanent reminder of love, risk, and the wilderness's unrelenting power. And so, the tale closes not with triumph, but with respect. A father's last gamble, a son's final climb, and a mountain that kept them both, reminders that nature writes the final word always.